What is that fire that ignites within you the moment someone challenges a deeply held belief? Can you feel it? That sudden heat behind your eyes, the quickening of your pulse, the mental fortress that snaps into place as you arm yourself with logic, with data, with biting wit. In our world, this reaction is celebrated. We're taught to stand our ground, to fight for our ideas, to never back down. The loudest voices dominate our airwaves. The most confrontational commentators get the most clicks, and winning an argument is often seen as the ultimate demonstration of intelligence and strength. But what if this entire framework is a magnificent and seductive illusion? What if the very act of compulsive arguing, which we have been conditioned to admire, is in fact the most telling sign of a hidden fragility? This is the profound and unsettling territory mapped out by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He forces us to conduct a fearless autopsy of our own motivations, to peel back the layers of our intellectual pride and look at the raw, often uncomfortable drives beneath. Nietzsche presents us with a paradigm-shifting truth, that the true measure of a person's power is not found in their capacity to dominate a conversation, but in their ability to transcend the need for that domination altogether. The compulsion to argue, he suggests, is frequently the refuge of the insecure, a performative dance meant to convince both others and, more importantly, themselves of a strength they do not truly possess. It is the ego's desperate attempt to fortify its own shaky foundations by tearing down the walls of another. In this light, every argument becomes a potential confession, revealing not what we know, but what we fear. The fear of being wrong, of being seen as insignificant, of having our carefully constructed worldview challenged. True strength, in the Nietzschean sense, is a silent, immovable force. It is the quiet confidence of the deep ocean, unshaken by the stormy debates raging on its surface. It is the power to hold a conviction so deeply that it requires no fanfare, no external approval, and no defeated opponent to validate its existence. As we embark on this exploration, we are not just analyzing a philosophical concept, we are inviting a personal revolution. We will learn to distinguish the hollow echo of the ego's battle from the authentic voice of our own will, and discover how to transform the energy we waste on external conflicts into the fuel for our greatest inner conquests.
To truly grasp the Nietzschean perspective on argumentation, we must embark on a deep and unflinching examination of the psychological underpinnings of our compulsion to debate, which leads us directly to the architecture of the fragile ego and its insatiable hunger for external validation. Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to see that the heat and frequency of our arguments are rarely proportional to the importance of the topic at hand, but are instead a precise barometer of our internal psychological state. At the core of this behavior lies what he would identify as a weak or underdeveloped will, one that has not yet learned to turn its power inward. This fragile ego is not a self-sustaining system. It is an entity that has failed in the fundamental task of self-creation and self-valuation. Instead of generating its own sense of worth from a set of personal, deeply held convictions that it has chosen for itself, it constructs its identity like a patchwork quilt, sewn together from the opinions, approvals, and disapprovals of other people. It lacks an internal gyroscope, and therefore it is perpetually off balance, tossed about by every contrary wind of opinion it encounters. When this ego is presented with a dissenting viewpoint, it does not register it as a simple alternative perspective that can be considered, evaluated, and either accepted or discarded. Instead, it perceives it as an existential threat, a direct challenge to its very right to exist in its current fragile form. The dissenting voice becomes not just a person with a different idea, but an invader threatening to tear apart the very fabric of its patchwork identity. The argument that inevitably follows is a defensive maneuver of the highest stakes. The subject of the debate, politics, morality, art, or even a simple matter of fact, is merely the terrain upon which this psychological battle is fought. The true objective is not to discover truth, but to achieve a very specific and desperate form of validation, the submission of the other. By forcing another consciousness to capitulate to its own, the fragile ego achieves a temporary euphoric sensation of solidity. It mistakes the act of dominating another's will for genuine self-confidence. This is what Nietzsche critically identified as a manifestation of ressentiment, a reactive, negative mentality where one's sense of self is defined not by one's own positive actions and values, but by one's opposition to and resentment of an external other. The individual trapped in this state is not a sovereign being. They are a slave to the reactions of their environment. Their emotional landscape is dictated by the latest compliment or criticism. Their entire psychological framework is built upon a foundation they do not control, making them extraordinarily vulnerable and, consequently, perpetually ready for a fight. This stands in stark contrast to the individual who has undertaken the difficult Nietzschean project of self-overcoming. This individual has, through introspection and will, built a citadel of the self from within. Their values are their own creation, their self-assessment is rigorous and internal, and their sense of purpose is drawn from their own life's project. For this person, disagreement is not a threat, but at best a curiosity, and at worst an irrelevant noise. They do not require the ritual of argument to feel real or justified, because their validation is an internally generated constant. They understand that to be truly powerful is to be unmoved by the need to prove one's power in the eyes of others. In this light, our most heated arguments can be seen as the desperate performance of a self we have not yet built, a tragic attempt to borrow solidity from the world because we have failed to generate it within ourselves. Every time we feel that compulsive urge to win a debate, we must ask, am I seeking truth, or am I seeking a temporary external patch for my internal fragility? The answer reveals everything about where we are on the path from a reactive to a sovereign existence.
To fully comprehend Nietzsche's disdain for the compulsive need to argue, we must turn to the most powerful and defining contrast in his entire philosophy: the radical dichotomy between the herd mentality and the ideal of the Ubermensch, or the overman. This is not merely a difference of opinion or behavior, but a fundamental schism in the very mode of existence, a choice between two opposing ways of constructing a self and relating to the world. The herd, as Nietzsche describes it, is the default state of humanity, a vast collective organism driven by an overwhelming instinct for security, comfort, and belonging. The psychology of the herd is rooted in a deep-seated fear, the fear of isolation, the fear of standing out, the fear of personal responsibility, and most critically, the fear of anything that threatens the consensus reality it has built for its own protection. Within the herd, values are not created through individual introspection and courageous living. They are inherited, absorbed osmotically from the surrounding culture, family, and tradition. These are the thou shalts and thou shalt nots that are never questioned because their primary function is not to elevate the individual, but to preserve the stability and homogeneity of the group. The herd individual finds their identity and their sense of worth through their conformity to these external standards. Their conscience is, in effect, outsourced to the collective. This is precisely why they are so prone to argumentation. When a member of the herd encounters a dissenting idea or a non-conforming individual, they do not perceive it as a simple alternative. They perceive it as a threat to the very moral and intellectual ecosystem that gives their life meaning and structure. To disagree with their opinion is, on a subconscious level, to exile them from the tribe, to sever the lifeline of validation that connects them to the collective. Therefore, arguing becomes a vital act of self-preservation, a desperate, often aggressive defense of the herd's dogma, which they have mistaken for their own authentic belief. Their passion in debate is not a passion for truth, but a passion for belonging, a terrified reaction to the specter of existential loneliness. In stark, almost monumental opposition to this stands the Ubermensch. This is not a superior human in a genetic or elitist sense, but a psychological and spiritual archetype, a human who has achieved the ultimate act of self-overcoming by breaking the chains of the herd mentality. The Ubermensch is, first and foremost, a creator, not a consumer of values. They do not ask, what does my society, my family, or my religion expect of me? Instead, they turn inward and ask the far more terrifying and empowering question, what can I, in my unique existence, create and affirm as valuable? This individual has undergone the difficult, often painful process of deconstructing the inherited self and building a new one from the ground up, brick by brick, with their own experiences, reflections, and will as the sole architects. For the Ubermensch, life is not about finding a place within a preordained structure. It is about building their own structure. Consequently, their relationship to disagreement and argument is transformed entirely. They feel no visceral need to convert others to their viewpoint because their self-worth is not contingent on the agreement of the herd. They understand that their personal truth, the values they have forged in the fire of their own experience, are valid for them regardless of how many people share them. Engaging in petty debates is seen as a profound waste of creative energy, energy that could be channeled into the ongoing project of self-creation, artistic expression, or the pursuit of their own highest potential. They do not argue their values, they live them. Their very existence becomes their argument, a silent, potent testament to a different way of being. The herd argues to feel secure within its walls. The Ubermensch, having left those walls behind, is too busy building a new world to look back and shout at the old one. In our modern digital age, this dichotomy is more visible than ever. The herd mentality manifests in cancel culture, viral outrage, and the pressure to align with trending ideologies, while the spirit of the Ubermensch is found in the independent artist, the nonconformist thinker, the quiet individual who lives by their own code, utterly indifferent to the approval of the digital mob.
It is a critical and often overlooked distinction that Nietzsche's condemnation of compulsive arguing must not be mistaken for an advocacy of passive acquiescence or quietistic withdrawal from the world. To do so would be to fundamentally misunderstand the core of his life-affirming philosophy. Nietzsche was not a philosopher of retreat, but of profound and vigorous engagement. His critique is not of action itself, but of a specific, degenerate form of it, the reactive, ego-driven spectacle of argument that masquerades as genuine strength. He invites us to shift our understanding of power from a model based on linguistic domination to one rooted in existential creation. The individual trapped in a cycle of reactive argument is like a fighter who only knows how to parry. They are entirely defined by the blows thrown by their opponents, their energy and identity consumed by defense and counterattack. This is a life lived in reaction, a perpetual state of response to external stimuli, which Nietzsche saw as a form of slavery. The true sovereign individual, in contrast, does not wait for a provocation to act. They initiate. Their energy is not spent in the frantic, often messy business of refuting others, but in the deliberate, disciplined, and positive act of building, creating, and embodying their values in the tangible world. For Nietzsche, the most powerful statement one can make is never uttered. It is lived. A life dedicated to art, to innovation, to deep personal relationships, or to the silent overcoming of one's own limitations. These are the authentic expressions of the will to power, channeled constructively. This is what he meant by philosophizing with a hammer. Not to smash others, but to tap idols and hear the hollow sound, and then to proceed to build something solid and resonant in their place. Arguing about a moral code is a pale, bloodless abstraction. Living by a personal code of one's own creation, especially in the face of adversity, is philosophy made flesh. The reactive arguer seeks to change minds through coercion and logic, a futile endeavor that most often leads to resentment. The individual of purposeful action changes the world around them through the sheer gravitational pull of their example. They understand that while words can be debated, a life well lived, a masterpiece created, or a hardship endured with grace possesses an argumentative force that is unassailable because it is experiential, not theoretical. This transition from reactive argument to purposeful action is the practical application of self-overcoming. It demands that we take the seething energy we might have expended on a bitter online debate or a heated family quarrel and consciously redirect it inward into the forge of our own character and outward into our projects. It asks us to become artists of our own existence, where our primary creation is ourselves and the impact we have on the world. In the end, Nietzsche challenges us to a simple but profound test. When faced with a conflict, will you choose the noisy, ephemeral victory of the argument, or the silent, enduring legacy of a purposeful action? Your answer will determine whether you are merely a voice in the crowd or a force in the world.
Nietzsche's critique of argumentation, conceived in the relative quiet of the 19th century, resonates with uncanny and urgent precision in the hyper-connected, digitally mediated landscape of our modern world. Our environment, particularly the realm of social media, has effectively become a global high-speed engine for the very reactive impulses he warned against. These platforms are not merely neutral stages for debate. Their very architecture is designed to incentivize and amplify the herd mentality's most base instincts. Algorithms thrive on engagement, and nothing generates clicks and comments more reliably than outrage, conflict, and tribal belonging. Every notification is a potential call to the herd, a summons to take a side, to defend the tribe, and to vanquish the perceived enemy. In this digital coliseum, the performance of argument is constant. We are encouraged to have instant, emotionally charged opinions on the most complex global issues, to reduce nuanced truths to 280-character declarations, and to craft our identities through a curated gallery of our takes and rebuttals. This is the herd mentality operating at light speed, and it exacts a heavy psychological toll in a state of perpetual, low-grade resentment, chronic anxiety, and a fractured sense of self that is pulled in 1,000 directions by the demands of the digital tribe. In this context, Nietzsche's philosophy is not a historical curiosity. It is a vital survival manual and a guide to reclaiming our intellectual and psychological sovereignty. The path forward he offers is not a simple set of rules, but a profound reorientation of our entire being. It begins with the difficult work of what we might call digital self-overcoming. This requires us to become acutely aware of our own triggers and compulsions, that almost physical itch to respond to a provocation, to correct a stranger, to have the last word. When we feel this urge, we must enact a Nietzschean pause, a moment of deliberate silence where we turn the questioning inward. We must ask ourselves with ruthless honesty, what is my true will in this moment? Is it to genuinely understand, to connect, or to grow? Or is it to perform my intelligence for an unseen audience, to soothe my own insecurity by dominating another, or to simply feel the fleeting euphoria of being on the right side. This moment of introspection is the first crucial step off the reactive hamster wheel. The next step is to consciously channel the energy we would have wasted on that reactive argument into what Nietzsche called the will to power in its highest form, the drive for self-creation and actualization. This is a tangible shift in life strategy. Instead of spending 30 minutes crafting a cutting reply to a comment online, we can spend that time reading a challenging book that expands our perspective, practicing a skill that brings us genuine mastery, creating something, a piece of writing, art, or code that did not exist before, or engaging in a face-to-face, empathetic conversation with someone whose lived experience differs from our own. This is the transition from being a consumer of conflict to a creator of value. It is about building what is sometimes called the inner citadel, a robust, self-validating identity so engaged in its own positive projects that the chatter of the digital herd becomes like background noise to a composer deeply focused on their symphony. This does not mean a retreat from the world, but a more powerful and selective engagement with it. We can choose to engage in dialogues, not debates. A debate is a battle of egos, a closed system, where each party is waiting for their turn to speak and defend their position. A dialogue, in the Nietzschean spirit, is a collaborative exploration, an open system, where both parties enter with the humility to be changed by the interaction, where the goal is not victory, but mutual expansion and a deeper, more complex grasp of the human condition. Ultimately, Nietzsche's relevance today lies in his empowering, albeit demanding message, that the greatest rebellion against the chaos and noise of the modern age is not to shout louder, but to cultivate an unshakable inner quiet, not to win more arguments, but to become a person for whom the need to win arguments has become irrelevant. The path forward is the path inward, and from that fortified center, we can then step outward to act in the world with purpose, power, and a profound sense of personal authenticity.